What up? Welcome back to From Beyond Champaign. I'm Cody. You can follow me on Twitter at Cody_CHGO. And I'm joined today by reoccurring guest, a good friend of mine, a good supporter of CHGO Cubs, Sunny Verma. What's going on, man?
Not too much. Like you, I'm kind of glad there's not much Cubs season to talk about right now. So at least the Illini are a pleasant distraction, hopefully for now. You never know what's going to happen, especially with the team this young. But I appreciate you having me on again. I know I've been on once, or maybe if not twice already, and I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I should have mentioned this. You co-host the new Locked On Illini podcast. I know you guys just launched it sometime within the last 6 months.
Memorial Day weekend. So we're about to hit 5 months or so. If you're interested in Illini content, I produce content every single day, half hour. I try to do weekends as well. Follow me there, Locked On Illini on the social medias, same thing. Hope to see you there.
Absolutely. And then obviously you do a Illinicast too, which I think I've gone on there last year. We had some good conversations, you and Austin and I. So I'm a big supporter of you guys, especially last year with Illinois and how they turned out to be way better than I expected them to ever be. And now we're rolling into 2024, 2025, the 20-year anniversary of the 04-05 team that went to the Final Four. I said this on the podcast I did the other day about my excitement going into the year, and I get excited every year, but now I'm even more excited because it's we finally got over that hump of getting to the second weekend,
right?
And I think Brad Underwood has silenced a little bit of the naysayers. I think they still exist, but I think they're a little bit quieter for now. And I am, at the very least, I am optimistic about whatever happens this year, which I have no idea what will happen with this team. I think they have a lot of talent, but only 2 players return,
right?
Dre Gibbs-Lawhorn and Ty Rogers, and then a bunch of new guys and that are transfers, freshmen, all these guys, a couple guys from overseas, right? There's so much new on this team, but still high expectations. Saw the coaches poll come out, projected to finish 4th or 5th in the Big Ten this year. So I'm excited. How you feeling, dude?
Honestly, same. It's one of those where I'm glad Brad got over the hump, as you mentioned. Not only Sweet 16, Elite 8, and quite honestly, I think it was one of the 4 best teams in the country. I agree with what Brad Underwood said the other day. We just happened to run in what was clearly the best team in the country in UConn, and we played them, I think, 60 minutes away from their campus. There was just a very low likelihood of coming out of that game with a victory. Like you, I'm kind of excited, but I'm also nervous about this season. What I love is that the talent level of this team, and I've gotten in trouble for saying this, is, in my opinion, higher than even last year's team. It's when you talk about the 10 guys that we have, the room in general, the locker room in general, I think has leveled up talent-wise. Now, what's the chemistry going to be like once the season starts? That's going to be something I think you and I are going to be talking about later today. But even ESPN, I think, released a top 100 NBA pool for college basketball just earlier today. And Illinois has 4 guys in the top 100. No other Big Ten school has more than 2. So Brad is raising the floor of this program. Cody, I know you've been a fan for a while. Back in the dark days, we'd be worried about missing or playing on the first day of the Big Ten tournament, that Wednesday night that nobody wanted to play. And so you'd have to play 5 straight games. Now we're at the point where I just talked about this on tomorrow's episode I just recorded of Locked On Illini. A down year for Illinois could just be 20 wins. And that's a really good feeling.
I know. It's crazy. Even 2 years ago, when they brought in Sky Clark and that was a failure and all that, they still made the NCAA tournament. And like, I think there was a lot of disdain and people upset because clearly there was a chemistry issue within the locker room. But I also like took it, took a step back and was like, they still made the NCAA tournament and as a large bid, and it's like, yeah, like at the back end of the Weber years and the entire John Gross era, it was like you felt like you had to battle to the very end to just even get a chance to get in. And now it's like, no matter what, I feel like they're a lock to make the NCAA tournament at the very least. You know what I mean? And that's a good feeling to have. And I feel like that's where this program should always be at the bare minimum. As much as I feel like they should go to the second weekend every year because of the type of talent they bring in and the coaching staff and all of that. If you're a program that consistently year in and year out goes to the NCAA tournament as an at-large bid and it's like a lock, you're giving yourself, not only are you giving yourself a chance to go to the Final Four or to an Elite Eight if the dominoes fall in your favor, sort of like last year, but you're also helping recruiting as well, which I think is, the success in recent years for sure has led to recruitment going up, or like the stock going up in recruitment at least. And I think as a fan, it's just more enjoyable. You don't have to sit here and question, do we need to fire the coach? Are we having a recruiting problem? Like these are things that when I was a kid, we were talking about all the time, dude. Like it's crazy to me that like some fans haven't been able to like appreciate what's going on within Illinois basketball. I hope going into this year, some of those fans are a little bit more open to believing, I guess. And going to that Elite Eight last year, I hope helped, but I still expect it to be hot and cold with Brad Underwood once the season starts, especially once we get into the Big Ten season. But man, does it make me exhausted if there's anything that makes me exhausted about following them in season every year. It's just the hot and cold takes between Brad Underwood, and I personally just don't get it, man.
Yeah, if you really just take a step back, I've said this before, but I truly mean it. I don't think there's ever been a better time to be an Illini sports fan. When it comes to having Brad Underwood in charge of basketball and Brett Bielema in charge of football, I did an episode last week where I said that I think Illinois has the best tandem of head coaches in the conference. When has that ever happened? Usually it's football in the doldrums, but even basketball pre-Brad Underwood for a decade, there was just not much to look forward to. But now, even when you pick on Brad, and sure, he has his warts, but is there another coach in the Big Ten you'd swap yourself out with? I don't think I would. And, I'm giving all the credit in the world to Matt Painter. Matt Painter, in my opinion, is a top 5 coach in the country. But I really like how forward-thinking Brad is. He doesn't wait around. Like he's very aggressive. If he sees something that doesn't work, he'll jump on the next trend. When it comes with his assistant coaches, he goes out and hires the best. Very forward-thinking. So for me, I think the anti-Brad guys lost their battle last year. They're going to still keep fighting because that's what they do. This Illini fan base is as passionate as any out there. We have a reputation. I think that's very simple for me to say, but again,
reputation.
Let's enjoy the ride. Yeah.
Let me just say that if there was anything about the Illini fan base that I thoroughly enjoyed this summer was just everyone who brought the receipts when Terrence Shannon Jr. was ruled innocent on all charges, and that me and you talked about it back in January, February when we first met, like having to talk about that stuff and everything and going through it and then get to that point this summer. It was one of the more gratifying things to be able to just sit back and watch as everyone who was wrong on that trying to come up with excuses and stuff. So, yeah, it was a great feeling at that time. So, yeah, it is a great time to be an Illini fan, and I would agree that maybe Matt Painter is probably the better coach. He's definitely had more success. Finally got to a Final Four with Purdue last season, and they didn't win it all. But I can't say anything. Illinois ain't winning national titles over the course of my life. I take getting to the Final Four as my championship, and I will forever hate Sean May with my entire being. But that team was great, and they lived up to expectations coming off the losing to a 16 seed the year before. They didn't finish it off like Virginia did, but that UConn team, if there's anything that makes me feel better about losing to UConn is that they went on to win the national title, and honestly, they did it in pretty easy fashion. What was the stat that they had the highest KenPom rating or whatever to win the national title, something like that? Like their KenPom rating was at a level that if it was within that range, every team that was within that range had won the national title within the last 25 years or something. It's been too long to remember the stat that I read about it, but I mean, they were a ridiculous team. So all I could do is just kind of tip the cap. I think you could go back and question some things that Brad did in that game, but I also think that they just had more talent too.
Yeah, I mean, you watched that game. There's obviously just UConn was in a different tier than Illinois was, and that's not something that Illinois should be ashamed of. I mean, I watched UConn versus Purdue, and those two teams weren't even all that particularly close. UConn, Dan Hurley he's the best coach in the country. We'll see how long he stays at UConn. I do think
he almost left. Yeah,
he almost left to the Lakers. But I think if that Knicks job ever opens up or that Boston job ever opens up, he would love to jump to that spot. But but again, bringing it back to Brad Underwood told his coaches after that game, that's what a national championship team looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And I do feel like, having that huge turnover in personnel that we've had this offseason, he's doing his best to kind of copy what UConn did. If you take a look at our team this year, Joe Jackson, a good friend of mine who does a Feed the Post podcast or a show on YouTube, he put out a tweet the other day where Illinois is the tallest team in the Big Ten this upcoming season.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of mimicking what UConn did. What Brad is obviously trying to do, and again, I'm spoiler alert, Jason, I see you in the chat. I appreciate you. I know you're a Locked On Illini watcher. I kind of talk about this on tomorrow's episode. Is Brad is trying to build an NBA team now.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's what I like about him. He sees what works in college basketball, and he just doesn't sit and wait around. We'll see how Matt Painter's strategy of not investing in NIL necessarily and focusing more on prep recruiting and development. That's very easy to say when you have arguably the greatest college basketball player of all time as your starter for 3 years. But, Brad is not going to sit around and wait. He had Kofi 1 year, and then all of a sudden he's gone, and he rebuilt his team. And, last year, same thing. We had for almost half the season, we were the top offensive team in the country, just hunting matchups. Tyler Underwood, his son, who's now an assistant coach with the team, looks like he's got a bright future. But that's what I kind of appreciate about Brad. He sees what's working, and he's like, let me do that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's not a lot of coaches out there that do that. Even Michigan State, you're talking about Big Ten royalty and Tom Izzo. If you reach out to your Michigan State fans, there's some of them who are starting to grow frustrated with Tom and his inability to really
adapt.
Adapt to the transfer portal.
Yeah. We've seen a lot of that from a lot of the older coaches. You want to use college football as an example. I think Dabo Swinney is a great example.
Exactly. Yep.
You know what I mean? So, I do love that Brad is more likely to adapt and just try to learn from mistakes and get better from them. And I love that he openly talks about it. He even kind of talks about it a little bit at Big Ten Media Days last week. So, listen, you lose your entire team outside of two guys, and you go out into the transfer portal and you recruit and bring in dudes to where you're getting projected to still finish in the top 5 of the Big Ten. Again, projected. As we see every year, it's chaos. Nothing ever pans out the way we projected or predicted to be. Excuse me. But I mean, more wins than anyone else in the Big Ten the last 5 years. So yeah. Yes, we spent the first 15 minutes loving on Brad Underwood. I will do it every show. I will.
You and I both, a big supporter. Right now again, because it was. I joke around about it, but it was a battle for a while. I think his style rubs people the wrong way, and I'm not saying he's flawless. Obviously, he, especially when it comes to in-game adjustments, he has a lot to be desired. But I just think when it comes to overall program building, we have never had someone like this in charge of Illinois. Bill Self was only here for a few years, and he moved on. Lou Henson was a little bit before my time, so it's hard for me to really compare the two eras. But the level of consistency that Brad has us at, it's one of those where once Brad is gone, I don't know if we're going to be able to continue it. So I'm enjoying the moment season by season while I can.
Right. Okay. Well, obviously, if you're reading the description or the title, we were going to talk about the schedule. Kind of talked about the Big Ten schedule on a reel that I put up a few weeks ago, but the non-conference schedule is out, and it's all basically out now. So I wanted to go through it with you to, one, help balance my expectations, I guess, and also like kind of give some people an idea of like when you hope Illinois starts to really theoretically gel. We were just giving Brad Underwood all this credit. I feel like most of his teams, even 2 years ago when that team was, I guess, in some ways a disappointment, but still made the NCAA tournament, I feel like their best moments of the season were entering February and going into March. I don't think that most people's opinions on the team changed too much, but you felt like perhaps they played their best basketball around then, and that's basically what I feel like his teams have done. And this year it's going to be, to me, this non-conference schedule is going to be interesting and not easy. And with the fact that the team chemistry is such a question, I don't know where to set my expectations.
Yeah. I'm with you. I'm telling you, I've gone over the schedule a few times now, and for me, I really think it's going to be a tough start. We got, an entirely brand new rotation, essentially. As you mentioned, just 2 guys returning, a lot of freshmen, a lot of guys who simply haven't played well together. And, it's not like we're playing Indiana's schedule. We're playing the, Sisters of the Blind or Sisters of the Poor every other weekend. This is that started the schedule, which I'm sure we're about to go over soon. Like at the beginning of the year, I think there's a chance that Illinois stumbles a bit. But, and I promised the last time I bring up Brad Underwood, I'm crossing my fingers, probably won't be. I think it's by design. I don't think Brad cares about having a Lottie season record anymore. I think he cares about the postseason. I think what he wants now is that old iron sharpens iron mentality, that I want these young guys playing in the toughest games. So once they're 27 games into the season and March hits, there's no environment that they're not already prepared for. There's no level of team where they're going to step on the court and be like, oh man, we haven't dealt with something like this before. And it might cost us a couple wins in November or December, but I think Brad's okay with that now.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's just look at the first 5 games here, right? They do an exhibition against Ole Miss. So that, I mean, it's an exhibition. Last year they played Kansas, right? And I wish that game would have actually counted, because then it would have been another loss for Hunter Dickinson against Illinois, but I digress. They open up against my alma mater, Eastern Illinois, Harvard of the Midwest, of course, but I will be rooting for Illinois to win and for Eastern to cover. They've played Eastern like the last couple years now to open the season. at home. The first 3 games at home, they get Eastern, and then SIU, Edwardsville, Oakland, and then they play Alabama. I believe it's in Alabama, correct? On the road. And then Maryland,
Maybe,
Eastern Shore.
I forget. Yeah.
I believe that Alabama game, like Brad even said it at Big Ten Media Days, that it's going to become them playing Alabama is going to be like a yearly thing now, kind of like what they've started to do with Tennessee. And so Nate Oates has done a great job of turning Alabama not necessarily into a basketball school. They'll always be a football school, but you got to give them a lot of credit for turning their basketball program into something that you have to look at now. They went pretty deep last year in the tournament too. So
they were a Final Four team, I think. And I mean, they're one of the handful of teams that might be number one coming into their preseason this year. So yeah, it's just one of those where that's probably the toughest game on our schedule. And it being so early in the year, I'm hoping, I just kind of got done saying like, it's going to take time for this team to gel. I'm hoping that game isn't necessarily a blowout. I have zero expectation of winning that game. Yeah. But if we're competitive in that one, then all of a sudden, how you and I are unsure about how the season is going to go, I'm about to get a lot more confident about what the season might look a couple months down the line.
If they hang around, especially like in a road environment. What do you call it? Lazy Forest Gump. Welcome back, man. He's been all over this chat. Was in a lot of the comment sections last year too. He says neutral site game next year in Chicago. And that's what Brad said at Big Ten Media Days, which that excites me because I live in Chicago. So I will plan to go. I hope it's at the United Center. And I think I said this on my last podcast, talking about it. Like they used to play UIC at the United Center like every year, in the 2010s. And unfortunately, there's one matchup between them where they lost, and that was one of the worst losses I've ever had to witness. But I love the idea of bringing Illinois back to play in Chicago for one game in the regular season again, because I've missed that, right? So if that's against Alabama, man, that would be a hot ticket to get next year. But go to Alabama this year down in Birmingham, I think is what Brad said, whether it's a neutral site or at their actual place. I don't know. But like you said, big test. And to be able to play like 3 schools, like mid-major schools, Oakland I guess has kind of been one of the better teams in the Horizon League. So you can't take them lightly.
Sure.
But you should beat them, right? And you should start the season 3-0, and hopefully you're in the process of trying to figure out roles, and you're not going to do it all in 3 games, but that's what those games are supposed to be used for. So, I'm kind of with you on this Alabama game. I will not expect to win, but it can certainly help set some of my expectations moving forward.
Yeah, I don't think it'll hurt my expectations. Again, if we get blown out, maybe I'm not trying to build it up excuses, but the excuses are there. Again, a team that's at that point, we don't know if it's set their rotation. I mean, Cody, right now, if you ask me to tell you what our starting lineup is, I have no idea.
Yeah.
Like I can come up with 3, 4, 5 different variations. And I don't know if the coaching staff knows. And so they may not know by the time the 4th game of the season kicks off. So, if we do end up getting blown out, I guess maybe it kind of depends on why and how we got blown out. But the Alabama game in particular, just because of who they are, the talented team that they are, and where we play them in the schedule, that's probably my one throwaway game where if we look bad, I'm not going to feel too bad about it.
Oh, hopefully it's a growing point at the very least. I'm trying to think of a game that can, in the past, that perhaps can make me kind of compare it, and I can't really come up with one. When I think of like recent bad losses in the non-conference, I think about like all the losses to Mizzou, and it pisses me off because Illinois is such a better program than Mizzou. They finally beat them last year. They dominated them. Like the way they beat Mizzou last year, that's what they should do every year, in my opinion. But yeah, I that's like the closest thing I can come to, though, as far as a non-conference. That now we get into December, and they've been playing Big Ten games in December in recent years, right? I think about losing to Penn State a few years ago.
Yeah. It was on my birthday. I remember that.
Yeah, right. But I don't think any of the losses they've had in the non-conference will be the opponent will be as big as this Alabama team. Maybe they beat Texas 2 years ago, but and they beat UCLA 2 years ago. But I don't even think those teams were nearly as good as what this Alabama team can be,
Yeah, I mean, Bama is, again, talked about as one of the teams that could win it all. And, you mentioned Nate Oates. I think he's also one of the top handful of coaches in the entire country. What he's got rolling at Alabama, all credit to him. In my opinion, that's clearly the toughest part of our schedule that is otherwise also very, very tough.
Yeah. Okay, so as we move along here, we get towards the end of November, Thanksgiving week. Maryland, Eastern Shore, whatever happens with Alabama, they lose. Hopefully you bounce back in the next 2 games against them and then Little Rock. And then you have the neutral site game against Arkansas in Kansas City. It's going to be on CBS, so a national televised game. Then you come up here I'm in Chicago, so I won't count it as here, but to Evanston and play Northwestern on December 6th. And then a few days later, you got Wisconsin at home right before you play Tennessee. So it does, like, you get 2 games where it's like, okay, whatever happens with Alabama, you bounce back, you continue to figure out your roster, and then it's Arkansas, Northwestern, Wisconsin, Tennessee, and then Mizzou. And it's like, okay, well, they projected Northwestern to be towards the bottom this year, and Boo Buie has finally left. Thank God. All right. But I can't sleep on Chris Collins and the way that he's got that basketball program going a little bit. I want to say that they're going to take a step back this year, but at the same time, you just never know. And going to Northwestern is not easy. I was at the game in January this past season, and I know the team's completely different now, but like it can be a hostile environment there. So that won't be an easy game, in my opinion. Wisconsin is always tough, even though BU kind of owns them. I think they've won like 8 straight against Wisconsin. And then Tennessee. I was at the Tennessee game in Knoxville last year. They're a good program, man. Yes. So it's a very tough stretch, right? Like almost immediately after the Alabama game, man.
Yeah, and quite honestly, that Arkansas game is actually probably my favorite game on the schedule. Just because you have all the stories, the sideline stories almost, John Calipari, Orlando Antigua leaving John Calipari, coming back to Champaign. You have the Visich brothers, both going head to head, hopefully, as long as Tomislav gets his NCAA issues straightened and taken care of. And we're talking about Illinois, who's basically had to build a brand new roster. John Calipari had to do the same exact thing with Arkansas. So I think that game, and we didn't even mention the fact that game's on Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
The Bears play at 12, and then immediately after that, that game comes on at 3:00. And, it's just one of those, it'll be a good, I called it a barometer game, just to kind of see where each team on both sides kind of stand. Because at that point, we have more games under our belt, and hopefully at that point, we know who the top 8 or 9 guys are going to be on the team. And Arkansas and Illinois are two teams that, should be playing into March. And so it's kind of okay, let's see how good we really are against that sort of level of competition.
Related to Arkansas, who, I know Calipari has a national title or 2 underneath his resume, but given how long it's been since his last one and his recent, failures, who would you rather have right now? Like realistically, like as the coach?
Between Brad and John?
Yeah.
I'll take Brad.
Yeah. I kind of feel the same way too. I mean, they wanted him out at Kentucky. Like they wanted him to go.
He's one of those, like, he has the same faults as Brad, when it comes to in-game coaching and in-game adjustments. John Calipari was in charge of the best program in all of college basketball for the past decade. And for the last couple of years, they've disappointed every single year. And you just mentioned it yourself. They wanted him gone in Lexington.
Yeah.
When you're talking about all time, of course, Calipari has the accolades and the championships. But I think right now, for where Illinois is and what Brad Underwood's trying to be, I think for the modern day game, I would rather take Brad Underwood.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see how he gets things going at Arkansas, a program that I wouldn't say has ever been like any kind of powerhouse or anything. I liked what Musselman did there for a little bit. They had some nice recruits come in. They had some fun moments. Had a couple upsets these last couple years. That led to some storm courts. That led to some cool must bust photos. But other than that, like I don't really know how many people really care about Arkansas basketball. But with him coming there now, they're at least raising the bar to certain types of expectations. And he's won championships. So the good news is it's year one for him. And I'm not so sure that I'm not so sure it's much different than Illinois' situation right now. Like the new players have to figure out how to play together. He's trying to figure out how to get that program to the next level, stuff like that. So in some ways, very similar based off rosters and stuff like that. But yeah, can't wait to watch it on top of all the other stuff I'll be watching on Thanksgiving Day, right?
Yeah, usually I'm napping during that 3:00 slot.
Right,
so
right.
I gotta take it easy on that Thanksgiving lunch because I'm probably gonna have a show to do after the 3:00.
Right. So yeah, we were talking a lot about the Arkansas game on November 28th. And then, like I mentioned, the Northwestern game, you got Wisconsin December 10th. You host Tennessee. So you get 2 home games before you do the bragging rights game in St. Louis. And then before the end of the year, you got Chicago State. So I'm expecting Mizzou to be better this year than last year. But as always, they should win the bragging rights game every year. And they're due for like a nice 5 or 6 game winning streak over Mizzou after like the previous 5 years. Like I think if a successful at that point, once we get to the end of the year, I think a successful non-conference season before the Duke game in February, of course, is somehow beating Arkansas and beating Tennessee and Missouri. Like if you can win 3 of the 4 of those SEC schools, I think that's a success. I would say at the very at worst you split it and win 2 of the 4. I think the more likely is you can beat Arkansas and Mizzou, but it'd be nice if they could start beating Tennessee too.
Yeah, I somewhat agree with you. I think I'd be okay with the 2-2 just because of how young this team is.
Sure.
Again, having Tennessee at home this time makes things, definitely a little easier because I think at that point Tennessee will be the 3rd strongest team that we play on our schedule. We'll have gone up against Alabama at that point. We'll have gone up against Arkansas at that point. So at this point of the season, you're kind of battle hardened a little bit. And I do think, I'd like to, even up the series with Tennessee. But, again, it's all about the style of play. I want to see these young kids at least progressively getting better game by game. And so that's probably what I'll ultimately judge it on.
Yeah. We got a guy in the chat fighting Illini 23. What a duo. He said, how do I not know this would happen? I mean, I don't know.
Appreciate you joining us.
Appreciate you hanging out, man. So, yeah, I mean, I guess realistically 2-2 would be fine. It would be fine. Again, this is why you're here, to help me not raise my expectations too high and not to go too low. I have a problem with that. Sometimes say they start 4-0 and beat Alabama.
Yeah.
I will undoubtedly think that they can be undefeated by the end of December. I know that is what I will do if they beat Alabama. You know what I mean? So 2-2 probably is more realistic and fine, but come on, we're coming off an Elite Eight season. Let's just win 3 or 4.
I think if like this was a more veteran team, right, or if we had more guys coming back, I would 100% agree with you. You know, I think we're at the point now where, as a program, that we should be trying to win 25 games, and we want to win every game that's on the schedule. I just think this year is kind of such an enigma and anomaly because of that huge roster turnover. We're going for when the 3 best players on our team were 23, 24, and 23 years old to now 18 years old, a guy who should be a senior in high school in Will Riley, and who knows who our 3rd best player is.
Right.
So I think that's where I'm more so tempering my expectations in the preseason. But that doesn't mean that I don't think this team can't win the Big Ten either. For me, I'm just using the out of conference schedule as the training ground that Brad, Orlando, Jeff, and that coaching staff is going to get them ready for Big Ten play.
Absolutely. Yeah. Jason in the chat, he asks who my starting 5 is. Him and Lazy Force Gump have been kind of going back and forth talking about who they think will start for I guess on first game of the year. I mean, I don't know. Like you already said that there's like 4 or 5 different situations, but I think in all those situations, I think Kylan Boswell will be your starting point guard. That is the only thing for sure. And I would assume that Kasparis and Will Riley will be in there too. After that, like I feel like Ty Rodgers has got to be a starter just because of the experience. But I understand the type of game they want to play. Is he going to actually start shooting jumpers like they've been showing all offseason on Twitter? Like the guys over at Sleepers are like putting down, and like anyone else like questioning, like is Ty Rodgers going to start shooting jumpers? Like I need to see it before I believe it. I would love to see it because it doesn't look bad, right? Like I don't know. Like positionless basketball. Up tempo, first one to 90 points. That's what I expect for Illinois basketball, man.
And I think that's a type of team that Brad's trying to build. Like he called out our defense on Big Ten Media Day, but if they're anywhere near the offensive weapon that they were last year, then quite honestly, it doesn't matter. Fine, come into our house and score 75 because we're going to hit 95.
Right.
And it's they play with that shortened 14-second shot clock for that reason. I mean, when it comes to starting lineup combinations, there's just so many. I think just simply on my show itself, I've had 3 different variations that I've convinced myself of.
Yeah.
So the tricky thing about Ty is Ty's a 3, right? So how can you have both Will and Ty Rodgers starting at the same time unless you go smaller and, you put Ty at 4,
right?
But then, Ben Humrickhouse is arguably going to be our top scorer this year, from everything that Brad has been talking about. So just so many toys. That's all I can say. Brad has a bunch of weapons at his disposal. And even me, a guy who's covering the Illini every single day, who's reaching out to people for feedback every single day, I have zero clue what that opening day lineup is going to look like.
Yeah. I think that's probably what's the most like exciting is just like the possibilities are endless, really. And we knew going into last season, it's like, okay, is Terrence Shannon Jr. going to, take that step? Is he going to be one of the best players in the country? Can this team play without a true point guard? Like how will Domask be able to fit in with this team? Stuff like that. And now it's like you got a bunch of dudes who have high basketball IQ and are really talented. How do you get them all to play well together? For of the 2 guys that are returning, I am excited about how they use Dre Gibbs Lawhorn because he took so many steps from the beginning of the season to the very end, and in March hit some big shots in some of those games in the NCAA tournament. And for half the year, everyone thought he was going to transfer.
Me too. Yeah, I mean,
So
if you told me that, all but 2 players were gonna be gone, I would have just assumed 100% that DGL would have been one of them.
yeah,
But, that's just kind of what makes his story even more unique, though, and one of the reasons I want him to succeed in Champaign because,
same.
what a story that would be.
Right. Yeah. So he'll have that NCAA tournament experience on him.
I
And
mean, if
so
he can come in here and like play that Justin Harmon role from last year,
yeah.
just that
But
that
even
guy
better
off the
because
bench.
he's more talented than Justin Harmon.
Yeah, definitely. But I'm just factoring in sophomore year, and then
Sure.
hopefully by junior year, DGL is one of your best players, one of your best scorers.
Sure.
But DJ, he was trying to figure out his role on last year's team. I think this year's team, he has a role, and it could be that 6th or 7th man off the bench who gives Kylan or Kasparis a breather to handle guard duties.
Sure. All right. Well, we still have a whole month to talk about this roster, which I will be doing up until the very first game of the year, obviously. But we can get into the Big Ten season and we've gotten to experience it a little bit with college football, dude. But I still can't believe that Illinois is going to be traveling to the other side of the country and playing teams like Oregon and Washington and I think that's the furthest. I think that's the most west that they go this year. They host UCLA at home. Yeah, that's what I'm looking at here. So, it's crazy to me that these teams from out west are now part of the Big Ten.
Yeah, I mean, it is nice just looking at the schedule though that we get that West Coast trip out of the way pretty much immediately.
Mm-hmm.
As you mentioned, the other 2 teams, USC, UCLA, we play at home.
Mm-hmm.
So once we're done, January 2nd and January 5th, we're not going out west anymore at that point. So that's me being positive.
Yeah. Oregon, I think, they're projected to finish somewhere in that top, 7, top 8. Dana Allman's a great coach. And then again, they go from Oregon to Washington. So they just basically go up the road, then come all the way back home and after that Washington game, 3 days later and host Penn State, which will be interesting because it's not like they're used to going all the way from the other side of the country and then play another game 3 days later. I know it's just 3 days later, but to me, it's nothing like they've ever done before. Maybe in the non-conference, but most of those are just like you go to a tournament, you're there for a few days, you know what I mean? But I don't know. I feel like that Penn State game at home could be tricky, and playing Penn State in recent years has been annoying. That loss to them at Penn State last year was atrocious. I don't think I've ever been more mad at Brad or mainly Coleman Hawkins after that game, but that was a game that you shouldn't lose. And I feel like every year they play Penn State, they set themselves up to lose the game, and it's like they're better than Penn State, dude.
I know, and it's always been 2 years ago it was the booty ball, which we couldn't. I forgot what the kid's name was. Who did it? Was it
Pickett? It was that.
Yeah. Pickett, who there's nothing we could stop. But again, what did Brad do? He kind of jotted notes down and all of a sudden incorporated it into our team last year. And then last year's game was just kind of weird. Like they had a quasi whiteout in what looked like it was a high school gym.
Yeah.
Where the crowd was all on top of the players. I agree with you, but as much as like excuses I was building in essentially for the team in the out of conference schedule, I took a look. They should be 4-0, at least in my opinion, as they kick off this part of the Big Ten schedule. I'm allowing those losses early in the year against what I think are very talented teams because my hope is that it's to build towards this Big Ten schedule where, the level of athleticism goes down a bit. I think Illinois is clearly the most athletic team in the conference, the most talented team too in the conference, depending on your definition of talent. And I think because we're so battle hardened, that Indiana matchup, which I think is the 5th one coming up, that's going to be the key one.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree because again, in December you got Northwestern and Wisconsin. Northwestern should be down this year. Wisconsin, you've handled every year in the Underwood era, really. And they return a lot of players, so that might, it'll be tough, perhaps. But as far as athleticism and talent, usually when they play Wisconsin, that is why they beat them. But Oregon and Washington. Oregon, I think, on the road will be tough, but they certainly can win that game. So, maybe out of those first 4 games, maybe at Oregon will be tough, but I feel like they should at least be 3-1 on January 8th when they play Penn State. A few days later, they get USC. They should beat them too. Indiana at IU. Those have been competitive games. They're getting a lot of hype this year. They got that transfer from Arizona.
They got a lot of transfers.
Right.
They loaded up this offseason.
How do I say this? Will I always root for IU's downfall? Yes. Will Mike Woodson get it right this time? He should, with the talent that he's brought in. They're projected to finish better than Illinois. And a few years ago they were good when they had Trace Jackson Davis. Did they go as far in the tournament as they probably hoped? No. But last year was I think a big disappointment for them. They call themselves a blue blood school, whatever. But I think this Indiana team could be scary based off the transfers they brought in, the experience that they have. It's almost kind of like last year's Illinois team with a lot of transfers and experience. And if they gel together, they could take off. And Ballo, for example, he, I don't think he's like Trace Jackson Davis, but they won with a big man, and I feel like they're going to go through him a lot this year too. So what's your thoughts on that?
If everything goes right for every team in the Big Ten, Indiana wins the conference. I think when it comes to just who are going to be the best college basketball players this season, I think Indiana has them, and they should. They went above and beyond when it comes to opening up that NIL war chest. Illinois got a lot of good prospects. We got a lot of good kids from Europe. We got a lot of top freshmen or seniors, high school seniors. What Indiana did was they got a lot of good college basketball players from other teams and paid them more to come to Bloomington.
Yeah.
The X factor there is Mike Woodson. Is he or is he not a good college basketball coach? And because we don't know the answer to that, that's why, I'm not ready to anoint them. Were they number 1, I think, in the Big Ten media poll? I wasn't sure if it was them or Purdue.
I thought it was Purdue.
Okay,
but they were number 2.
But then they're number 2.
Yeah.
They should be, and they absolutely should be a second weekend team. If they're not a second weekend team this year, then Mike Woodson's gone because this season was an abject failure. And another thing, as much as I'm comparing Illinois' schedule and how easy or to how difficult it is, Indiana's got the complete opposite. Indiana, I mentioned earlier, is playing a cakewalk of a schedule, and a schedule where they're not going to be challenged. And so that's why I'm actually looking forward to that game where Illinois at that point will be battle hardened.
Mm-hmm.
Indiana, not so much. So are we able to punch them first? And are they able to regroup and punch back? Or, are they just not going to be ready yet?
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. They only play them one time this year, so they don't come back to Champaign. But it's always a close game. But yeah, I think if you're talking about questions for IU, it's more about the coach than it is the talent or the players. Yeah. And as we've had to discuss over the years about expectations and talent and all that, listen, even going into this year, as we kind of talked about, Brad Underwood still has some of those people. So it'll be an interesting matchup, but I will expect Indiana to be the favored team by Vegas. Especially at home, on Peacock or on national television, I guess, in some ways. So you got 2 back-to-back road games there with Indiana and then Michigan State. Then you got, which Michigan State at Michigan State will be tough. It's an 11 a.m. game too on CBS. I hate when Illinois plays at 11 a.m. I feel like the kids don't get out of bed early enough or something like that. Maybe they spend too much time at Fat Sandwich the night before. I don't know. But yeah, that one feels like one of those that can ruin my Sunday. We'll see. But come back home, Maryland, Northwestern, get to play with Northwestern a second time and this time at home. Maryland will be tough. I think they have righted the ship there a lot better last year than I expected them to be. Going the road to Nebraska. Casey Tominaga is now gone. Will they be any better? I hope not. But Casey Tominaga is gone, so that's all that matters to me.
Yeah, right. Last year's America's darling. Nebraska Cornhuskers. I mean, Fred won Coach of the Year last year in the Big Ten. But
he's got something going on there, right?
What was that?
I said he's got something going on there, right?
Well, we'll see this year, right? I mean, he did his job last year, but coming into last year, he was one of those names that was, on a quasi hot seat.
Yeah.
And, obviously the guys that he brought in via the transfer portal, it all worked out. He's going to have to do it again this year because, they lost a decent amount of talent.
Mm-hmm. So, that's so you got those 2 road games, Indiana and Michigan State. Then you come home for a week, host Maryland and Northwestern. Then the next week you go to Nebraska, then come home, host Ohio State, which I don't know what to expect about Ohio State. Chris Holtmann got fired. They were better after they fired him. Bruce Thornton was in the preseason, Big Ten starting 5 or whatever they call it, the Big Ten team. He's good. Like I've watched enough to know that I think he's a good basketball player. And then Rutgers, which I think could be like the dark horse of the conference, really, with the talent they're bringing in. They go to Rutgers. It's never easy to win at Rutgers. Right. They blew them out last year in a surprising win, in my opinion. I guess in terms of just the fact that it's so hard to go to Rutgers and win. But by February 5th, you're hoping that this team's starting to really gel. And they've picked up some wins, especially on the road there. They got 5 road games. I'm hoping they can win 3. And 3 of them at least being Nebraska, Michigan State, and Washington at the very least.
Yeah, but even like you mentioned, Michigan State's going to be a tough game because I think they're going to be pretty good next year. They're going to have Fears back. At point guard. That game is on the road. You mentioned 11 a.m. It's just the Big Ten is such a grind. I'm with you that I think we should definitely win more games than we lost, especially because the tougher teams are going to come up a little bit later in the schedule. But at that point, you're hoping that Illinois has figured themselves out.
Yeah. I mean, that Michigan State game, maybe not. I'll find it very hard to believe if they can go to Oregon, then to Washington and win back-to-back road games like that. I envision them splitting it, to be honest. Maybe they can go to IU and win. That'd be a huge win if they go to IU and win. But maybe if they win 3 of those 5 road games in January, maybe it is those 2 West Coast games and Nebraska, And rather than not have to endure a week of losing to Indiana and Michigan State, though.
Yeah, no, you and I both, because at that point the fan base, the honeymoon phase from getting to the Elite 8, that's going to be over at that point. Like, here we go again. We stink. Brad needs to go. Blah blah blah. Not ready for that again.
Right. So, I think best case scenario is they're able to split one of those. I think maybe Indiana's the better shot. And then, this is me speaking from a gambling standpoint. You get the big road win at Indiana only to fall flat on your face at an 11 a.m. game at Michigan State the next game. I could see that happen. I hate when Illinois plays at 11 a.m. on the weekend. I hate it, dude.
You might be right, though. Honestly, if I had to grade which team I think we could have a better chance at beating, it might be Indiana. And that's not to say that they're not the best team in the Big Ten, but as I mentioned before, they just haven't been challenged up until that point in the season. So, how do they react when the first good team goes up against them? Because I don't think Illinois at that point is going to be intimidated by that Indiana atmosphere. Now, I mean, Indiana in Bloomington is one of the best atmospheres in college basketball. Don't get me wrong, but at that point, these young players, they'll already have gone through something like that.
Right. Okay, so we got about 5 minutes left, so let's go through February. I mentioned Ohio State. You host Ohio State, then you go to Rutgers. You go to Minnesota, who you have dominated for years. You host UCLA, which will be a huge home game. Might be the biggest home game of the entire season outside of Purdue at the very last game of the year. And then you have Michigan State. They come to your house, and you go to Wisconsin. So those are the first 5 games there. Yeah. So you got 3 home games, 3 out of 5, the first 5 games in February. And like I've said, I feel like Brad Underwood teams usually start to gel beginning of February. So Ohio State, Rutgers, Minnesota, UCLA, and Michigan State. I feel like if that fact remains true, UCLA at home will be a huge game. I feel like if you can win that on top of taking care of business against those other 3 games, maybe Rutgers will be tough. If you can win those, you can beat Ohio State, Minnesota, UCLA, and depending on whatever happens against Michigan State the first time, maybe you can win that one too. And then you're feeling really good with the final 5 games with Iowa, Purdue, and Duke to end the season, and Michigan.
Yeah, I mean, the toughest part of our schedule is definitely going to be those last few games. You're talking about a couple teams that could potentially win the championship, right? Purdue and Duke back there. But overall, Alan, I appreciate it. Thank you. Overall, I really don't think this is that bad of a schedule compared to some of our competitors. We have, the top 3 teams projected by Big Ten Media Days. Purdue, we have at home. Indiana, we have very early in the Big Ten season, at their place. UCLA, we only play one time, and it's at home. That's kind of a best case scenario when you're trying to divvy up that Big Ten schedule. And, not that it's easy by any stretch, I think it's very interesting move by Brad to want to go to Madison Square Garden to, play Duke. And that's going to be a game where there could be a half a dozen NBA prospects on the floor, at Madison Square Garden. My wife's family's from New York, so I'm going to try to fly out there for that game and try to catch it live. See a guy like Cooper Flagg going up against Nicholas Ferris. I think that's going to be one of the games of the year when it comes to the college basketball scene. So that it's going to be a fun one. And at that point, again, you're hoping that this machine that we're talking about, which may stutter right off the bat, may stumble coming off the starting line. At that point, they know their roles. These players have adapted to the speed, the size of college basketball, and you're going to see the best Illinois basketball at that point, typical to what Brad Underwood usually does with his teams in previous years, like you mentioned.
Yeah. I mean, being able to play Duke at a neutral site in February, like Brad's right, like it's going to feel like a NCAA tournament game, and that is exciting. And there will be NBA talent on the court, so it's just weird that it's in February. Am I against it? No, but it certainly is a huge test for this roster. If all things go well in terms of how the roster develops and everything with all these new players, you go and play Duke at MSG and you figure out a way to win that game. And you got 2 of the last 3 games at home, 2 of them against, a rival, in my opinion, in Iowa. And then I don't care what Purdue fans say. It's becoming a rivalry. All right. Purdue fans can say whatever they want. My guy, Greg Braggs, can tell me that Illinois doesn't have a rival all he wants. I don't care. He knows that he wants Illinois to lose, specifically so I suffer. All right. So, I mean, we'll see how, the end of February, how this team's formed at the end of February going into March and all that. But, yeah, I would agree. And I mean, I haven't taken the time to look at all the other teams' schedules and stuff, but considering you don't have to go to Mackey Arena, you don't have to go to Carver Arena, and no matter how good or bad Iowa is, it always feels like it's a very tough environment to play in. You only have to play UCLA once and it's at home. Like that's kind of a gift. Maybe it's a gift because you're playing such a tough non-conference schedule in a way, So I'm excited, man. I'm excited to see how this team does against what I think is a tough early schedule, but maybe not so much of a tough schedule in conference, even though it's still tough because it's the Big Ten.
Yeah, it's one of those schedules where there's no real path for us to match the 29 games that we won last year. That's obviously clearly not going to happen. But come April, if you tell me that this game or this team was a first weekend eliminated from the tournament, I'd be like, I kind of see it. But if you also tell me that this team made the Elite Eight at that point, I'd be like, well, yeah, I can actually kind of see a path for that too. So as you mentioned, this is just one of those teams where I don't know what the season's going to look like. And for that reason alone, I can't wait for the season to start.
Yeah. No, I'm with you, man. So first game is, if you don't count the exhibition game, first game of the year is November 4th against Eastern. So we got less than a month to go. I'm excited. Thankfully, the Bears are interesting enough to where I'm not begging for the season to come around. However, I am kind of like itching for it because I'm so happy that baseball season, for me at least, is over. And Illinois, the last 5 years have been the only thing that truly has given me any sports fandom happiness. So I'm hoping that continues again this year. Yeah, man. So any final thoughts for you before we head out of here?
No, not so much. I'm going to look forward to catching you on. Hopefully, I'll bring you on Locked On Illini if you're open to it. We'll have you in a Illinicast as well. That's a little bit more long form. As Alan mentioned, I'm doing content every single day on the Locked On channel. So if you're interested in Illinois sports, whether it's basketball or you also like football, or I'm even trying to dive into the other sports, definitely follow me there. But I think it's going to be a fun season. It's just one of those where because the team is so young, we shouldn't lose to Eastern Illinois, but if all of a sudden we did, it'd be like, okay, well, you were really going to start the difficulty on a high level. I just don't know. I know nothing about this team, and I can't wait to learn more about them.
Yeah. I don't know how I'll feel if Eastern Illinois somehow beats
the Cody Bowl.
Yeah, it will be kind of like how when Illinois football just pounded them 45-0 beginning of the year, and
right.
A lot of people were coming at me, and I'm like, guys, I like Illinois too, but I just feel like I'm gonna be really pissed if Illinois loses the Eastern, but also just this big part of my Eastern pride that I have, yeah, we just beat a Big Ten school for second time in the last 5 years, because I love to bring up that they went to Iowa and beat them a few years ago.
Oh, that's right. I was like, I knew they beat somebody, but that was Iowa, even better.
I think according to Vegas, that was when they beat Iowa. It was a few years ago. They were spread wise the biggest underdogs ever. Something like that to win outright. So yeah. And then last year they went to Kansas and covered, which was a big moment. So they definitely can't take them lightly. That's for sure. I don't know what's going on in Charleston, but they kind of sneak up on some teams the last couple of years. So again, I always root for Illinois to win and for Eastern to cover, so I can say that they covered.
Now, I usually do post games for these games. Maybe the Cody Bowl, Cody. If you're not doing anything, I'll bring you on for that post game, and let's find out what your thoughts are.
Sure, man. I'm down for it. I'm absolutely down. So, all right. Well, I appreciate everyone hanging out. If you're on YouTube, please hit that like button. And I know I've been gone most of the summer. As everyone knows, I cover the Cubs for my full-time job, but Illinois is right around the corner. I'm doing a lot more content on the YouTube channel with Illinois. We did a sports betting video with a buddy of mine earlier. If you're into sports betting, go watch it. We talked about Thursday Night Football tomorrow. been doing a lot more stuff. So any support is appreciated. It means a lot. And yeah, but at the end of the day, we're here for Illinois basketball mostly. So yeah, man, make sure to check out Locked On Illini. Sounds like a lot of people here already do. So
I appreciate all of you.
I think a lot of people are here because they like your face, and good for you, dude. Good for you. I've as someone who does content creating for a living and stuff, it's been fun to watch your growth over the last year that we've known each other, and I'm happy for the success that has come your way, dude.
And likewise, Cody, you're one of the first people I reached out to for advice. And, I sometimes pinch myself with how fast everything's growing. I didn't make my first YouTube video until August of last year. And now I've got one of the fastest growing channels on the Locked On network. And basketball season hasn't even started yet. So, I can't wait. I owe a piece of it to you. And I always appreciate that I can reach out to you whenever I feel the need to, and you're always very quick to respond back. And so, I'm looking forward to enjoying this Illini season with you. Hopefully, we have another good season similar to last year.
Absolutely, man. All right. Enough of the gushy stuff. Let's get out of here. Again, hit the like button and subscribe to the podcast on Spotify. I think I once again forgot to put the link in the description. I will update it, but it's easy to find. All you got to do is search the podcast name. So again, I appreciate y'all checking it out. I will be back on Friday. Mike Carpenter from the 200 level is joining me. We're going to talk about his book and probably do another version of this in some aspects. So we'll see y'all then. And until then, ILL.
I